Well, I mean, I went to Vegas, right? I was 21, 22. And I'm like, when you're 21, 22, you think you're the shit.
Yeah.
You just do, right? Everyone who's 21 thinks they know everything. And not till you're 26 do you realize you knew nothing. And then when you're 30, you realize, actually, I knew nothing when I was 26, right? So I went there with, this just overly confident. Within, I brought like $2,000 with me or something. 24 hours later, I was watching from the rail. But I remember there was a very important moment for me in my career because I remember I was playing with 7 people, and it was like 3 a.m. when I'd lost all my chips. I went to the bathroom, washed up, washed my face. I came out. They were all gone. They quit immediately after me. And like, that's a telltale sign. Like in poker, if everyone leaves when you leave, that means you are the sucker. Right. So I remember that moment of feeling like, well, you guys think I'm the sucker? And I remembered each and every one of those faces and like vowed to myself that I would get revenge on them at some point. And one of them actually ended up being somewhat of a mentor to me. Hawaiian Bill, his name was. And like, I remember him just crushing me, crushing my soul. And then eventually I was able to become friendly with him and, realize he's just doing his job. That's just the,
so what's gig. So going from like, you're young, you feel like you're the shit at it, then you go up against the pros. What's the stuff? What's the difference between someone that thinks they're good at poker and a professional poker player? Like is there like a single X factor? What is it?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. It's like, I've heard the analogy and it just makes sense to me. It's like poker's a lot like sex. Like when you ask people if they're any good at that, most people say, yeah, I'm good. I'm either great or I'm decent or I'm good. Like no one thinks they suck at it, right? Yeah, I'm pretty good at that, right? Thing with poker is it just takes like anything, right? Like what you've been doing for as long as you've been doing. Mm-hmm. Like I'm sure like the first 3 months you did what you did, you weren't nearly as good as you were like years later, right? So it requires so much more experience, especially today. It's a lot harder to learn today than it ever has been. Well, it's actually, let me say it a different way. It's easier to learn. It's just more complicated. There's more access to different videos. Like I have a master class available, but like, so there's other people that will show you how to do it. It's just far more intricate. In the old days, we used to be like, you'd look at a guy and be like, you know what? I think he's got shit. I raise, right? Now, like when you hear people speak about the game with software and computer technology, it's like a lot more advanced where they're breaking down the mathematics of it to an extent that wasn't available when I grew up.
So, okay. So you think at the high level, it's less about the bluff. It's less about the feel. It's more just the repetitions and even like maybe feeling the math and like feeling like, okay, this is what I know the percentage chance because of what I have in my hand.
Yeah. So what's been created, it's not new. It's been a theory that's been around for a long time, but it's new in poker. It's called game theory optimal. Are you familiar with what that is?
No.
So game theory optimal means you're playing in such a way where you can't lose. So imagine a great example is, Rochambeau, like rock, paper, scissors, right? Okay, so what would be like if the game theory optimal approach to doing that, right? How often would you throw rock, paper, and scissors? You would go 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Mm-hmm. If you do that randomized, no matter what the other person does, you can't lose, right? The problem though is you can't win either. You're always going to break exactly even. So what poker players are doing now is they're trying to find out what the GTO, we call it, the game theory optimal decision is, and then you veer from it. So for example, let's say I find myself in a situation where, theory says I should bluff, right? But now I know I'm playing against Philip DeFranco, and he never folds. So why would I try to bluff him? So I'll veer from it. So now I'm going to like do something different. So if you were playing Rochambeau, I start to notice you keep playing rock over and over and over, or you playing rock too often. So I'll adjust and I'll play paper a little bit more, right? So it's kind of like a little bit of a more complicated way to try to play perfectly.
So, okay. So, I mean, part of that, it's still referenced trying to play an individual. So are there still instances where a no-name will get to a final table and they can wreak havoc? Or is that really not the case?
It's harder now than it was like maybe even 5-6 years ago because as I said, the game's really evolved. Mm-hmm. But it still can happen. Like poker is ultimately a game of luck. Like you can get a pair of aces, which is the best hand, and then you can be up against a guy who just says, screw it, I'm going all in with 9-6, and he's still going to beat you like 14% of the time, right? And, so there is luck. Now, for an amateur who knows nothing to get to a final table would need an immense amount of luck to do that. So you're going to have some sort of understanding of the game in order to get there. But aggressive play, especially in tournaments, is often rewarded. So if you had coming to this wild man who just keeps bluffing a lot and going all in, if he has a good run of cards, or she, See, 2020, fixed myself. They, he, him, them. You know.
Well, is it a heavily male dominated industry? I didn't even think of that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the numbers typically in a World Series of Poker tournament, you're talking about 3 to 6% of the field is going to be women. Yeah, it's slightly higher online. We play online poker as well, and I think part of that is it's a less intimidating environment for women, right? Like women go into a poker room, and you're just going to have a lot of the misogynistic, horrible, condescending things that maybe they're not as comfortable with. Or they don't want to feel stupid or look stupid. Online, you have the anonymity. You can make your name like, John Bull Strongman or something. You can just make up your own screen name. So there's a lot more women who do play online. And
right now, I know that you mentioned beforehand, you're playing a lot more online these days because of the pandemic. Is it vastly different, or like you're saying, because of game theory optimal, like it's close to the same feel?
Well, I mean, there's one key difference, which should be obvious, is that when you're playing live poker, you get to see the people, so you know exactly who you're playing with, and you get to see their faces. And one of the things that I was always very good at throughout my career is reading body language and physical tells. So even though like the math says do one thing, I look at the guy and his nose is twitching, or he's chewing his gum, and all of a sudden he stopped like that. So I veer from that strategy based on that. So you can't do that online, right? So online, it's just all about the fundamentals. I just recently came back from Cabo, Mexico. I have been quarantined, and we sort of quarantined there as well. We didn't leave the house because they had the World Series of Poker online. So poker online has been booming as a result of the pandemic. But I think most people would like to get back to the tables when it's safe.
What's I mean, on the kind of note of body language, is there like a beginner's way, if I'm going to sit down with a bunch of other amateurs, that I can stone face or bluff, or because one of my big things is my face betrays me constantly. And I don't know how to control it. And it's not even for me, just like poker. Were you just always like that, or what could I do if I wanted to try and bullshit?
Well, one of the things, like, you're worried about your own tells, right? And giving off stuff rather than reading people. One of the things I did, especially when I was young, and I was very intimidated by all these stars of the game when I was like 22, 23, was I sort of, they put the 5 cards in the middle, right? So I would pick the middle card and I would just stare at that card. So like I wouldn't, when I bet my chips, after that, I would just focus on staring at the card and not moving, right? One of the things you can look for if you want to find in other people, sort of like an easy guide, is you want to look at how comfortable does the person look to you, right? So if somebody's very stiff, like a board, and all of a sudden, they're clenched up, they're more likely to be uncomfortable because they don't have a very good hand. If they're relaxed in their chair and their body language is like this, they're likely comfortable because they're not afraid that they're about to lose a bunch of money. So those are basic things. But as a poker player, you just look for whatever's different or unique in somebody. Like if you notice that all of a sudden this guy's been chewing gum the whole time, chewing. Now he bets all his chips and he stops chewing, right? What does that tell you? Well, that tells you he doesn't want to bring attention to himself. He's uncomfortable, so he's going into his little box because he's bluffing.
Man, do you think that's the most common? The common thing is someone just they're just naturally tense. Is that like the biggest bluff?
That's one of them. I mean, just like the intensity. You can even see it in their fingers. Like if you're adept at this, like when you press your finger against something, you can see the white on your nails, on your fingernails. Well, sometimes people will press their fingers into the table when they're intense and stiff. But yeah, I would say typically if you notice somebody stiffen up, like if somebody normally sits like this and all of a sudden they're sitting like this, it's far more likely that they're what we call weak, which means they don't have a very strong hand and they're bluffing.
Sure.